Spotify sucks. Okay, well actually Spotify isn't that bad, but I want to take you guys back a couple of weeks and actually unpack why I've been thinking that. Over the past few weeks, my social feeds have been absolutely dominated by the presence of Spotify Wrapped, and it's gotten me thinking, why do I use Apple Music? Why did I switch from Spotify over a year and a half ago only to miss out on Wrapped and all of the other cool Spotify features that have launched since my move? So just before Christmas this year, I moved back to Spotify for about a week. Now, I wanted to stay for longer. In fact, I didn't even make the switch thinking about a video. I genuinely wanted to permanently move my streaming life over to the other side. But eventually, that journey went from I'll switch forever to I'll switch for a month for the video to where we are now, which is it's been a week, I've seen enough. You might have gathered my initial thoughts on Spotify from the intro there, but it's definitely more complicated than 3 words, which I have to censor one of them so that YouTube doesn't refuse to pay my bills. My name is Harry, you're watching Probably Hades, and these are my experiences as an Apple Music user after 1 week with Spotify. Switching music platforms is not as difficult as people tend to imply. Sure, it's not the easiest thing in the world, and it gets even harder the more songs that you've curated in your collection, but it's not exactly impossible either. I use the app SongShift here, and while it did cost me $7 for the month, it did also transfer around 800 songs in just a few minutes to their respective playlists from Apple Music to Spotify with almost no issues at all. And the issues I did run into were pretty easy to fix with the tools in the app. Although going through every single song you have saved might be a little bit of a nightmare, and it definitely was for me considering I missed a few that ended up being clean versions or different songs entirely. Easily the hardest part of switching music platforms is regaining your taste profile and kinda fine-tuning that algorithm again. Like it or not, your platform of choice probably keeps tabs on exactly what you listen to and generally provides some pretty great recommendations based on that in your playlists, radio stations, etc. On a brand new account, you might have an easier time than I did, considering I had to wipe months of my sister accidentally using my account, and drilling the likes of Taylor Swift, Gracie Abrams, and Leigh Banks out of my algorithm. No hate to any of those artists, but they're not my thing. As far as I'm aware, neither of these platforms has the option of modifying or removing songs from your listening history to reset your taste profile, which seems like a no-brainer to add, especially for Spotify, considering that the first thing you're dropped into when you open the app is a homepage that is not controlled by you, but rather curated by your listening history. I was made painfully aware of this after it took multiple days to remove the Taylor Swift mix from my homepage. Apple Music's algorithmic features aren't as prevalent, considering the first screen that you open the app to is your library, which you maintain full control over. But it would be nice to have a fresh start button on both platforms. One thing I feel that is a missed opportunity on both sides here, and actually really just every streaming platform, is the ability to import your listening history from other platforms. Both Spotify, Apple Music, and pretty much every other platform on the planet are able to get a short listening history by simply using an OAuth integration, and both platforms also have the option to request an extended listening history that can download every song you've ever listened to in a standard format, which apps like stats.fm take advantage of to provide more in-depth and accurate statistics. Having an option to import these into a third-party streaming service would mean a much more graceful switch that keeps your personal tastes and history. It would mean I could have had a complete Spotify Wrapped this year instead of essentially nothing, and it would remove a huge barrier to entry that a lot of users have when it comes to moving streaming platforms. And I mean, if you're going all that way with importing listening history anyway, you could also import playlists, songs, library, etc. But once I'd made that initial switch and gotten through the headache of actually moving streaming platforms, it was a pretty decent experience, and I'll go over that, starting with the content and playback experience. The library on Spotify is essentially the exact same as Apple Music and the other big competitors in the streaming world.
That's not to say that neither platform doesn't have their own exclusives. I know Spotify at least used to have some exclusive podcasts. It looks like they're starting to move away from that now, but that was a thing. And Apple Music also has some exclusive content like the Apple Music live sets, which are really good, but mostly it is the same.
Every song that I personally listened to and that was on my playlist transferred just fine over to Spotify, and newer songs that I discovered through Spotify transferred back over to Apple Music flawlessly. Shout out to Bixby with Darling He Lied and Why. Those go so hard and were songs I decided to listen to for the first time via Spotify. The key difference that I noticed as an Apple Music user is the additional content in the form of audiobooks and podcasts. And while it is nice to have one app and subscription for basically everything audio, I do personally prefer having dedicated apps for each thing. Having everything in a single place means that while it's convenient, one app experience needs to morph to different use cases, as opposed to an experience being centered around the content. That's probably just me. It's probably the reason I prefer to use Craft Docs, Trello, and TickTick over just Notion, for example, or why I genuinely hate Snapchat's app and prefer dedicated apps like iMessage or Signal.
One really cool thing I want to mention about Spotify and the way that it does audiobooks is that you don't need to commit to a certain book before using it. On Apple, for example, there's no subscription at all. You have to buy the books individually. On Audible, even if you have the subscription, you need to commit one of your subscription credits to a book. Meanwhile, Spotify, you have 15 hours of listening time across their entire library, and you can commit later if you decide you like a book.
Another thing I did actually really enjoy about Spotify's content library is their implementation of music videos. Apple Music does have support for music videos, and you can stream them, download them, whatever, but it is nowhere as smooth or easy of an experience as Spotify. Apple Music separates music videos as their own pieces of content, separate from a song, but Spotify combines them and lets you switch between video and audio on the fly, kind of like YouTube Music. I get that some music videos are going to have different audio and timings compared to the actual mastered track, but I truly believe that Apple of all companies can make it happen, especially if Spotify can A, do it, and B, do it this seamlessly. And that's about all the good I have to say about the playback experience, and I'm bringing the biggest thing here straight away, just getting it out there. Where in the hell is lossless and spatial audio? It's been almost 4 years since Spotify first announced Spotify Hi-Fi in February of 2021, and we still have absolutely none of it actually in the app. It feels like it's constantly just around the corner, guys, like how we every now and then see a new icon data mine from the desktop app or something, or how the CEO's coming out and being like, guys, trust me, it's coming, again, and it just never does. And this is completely ignoring the ability to stream in any sort of spatial or surround sound audio. Apple has caught up with lossless and spatial. Tidal has always had Hi-Fi and caught up with Dolby Atmos support. Amazon has Atmos and Hi-Fi. There's smaller platforms like Qobuz which have Hi-Fi. You've probably never heard of Qobuz, they got Hi-Fi, and Spotify just cannot get there for some reason. And honestly, I don't even care. I'm listening through glasses or my AirPods. It's honestly just the principle of it at this point. It makes no sense for me to switch over to a platform that has audio that sounds worse. I may not notice the higher bit rates, but Dolby Atmos, for example, on the songs that are well mixed for it are game changing. You'll particularly notice the effect on Lil Nas X's Need That Boy at around 1 minute 38, where the background vocals feel like they're circling you in a way that just isn't as prevalent on Spotify with standard stereo audio. Even when Spotify finally does get lossless audio, it's expected that they will be charging an extra fee for it, when Amazon and Apple have had it included in the base subscription since day one, and not even Tidal charges extra for it anymore. The final note I have on playback is about Spotify's shuffle play, and it's not even about how it's rumored to not actually be shuffled, or how it tries to shove Smart Shuffle down your throat every time you try to turn on normal shuffle, but it's just how it handles shuffling a playlist, for example. It's a bit hard to describe, so here's a scenario. The same one on both Apple Music and Spotify. Let's say I've gotten home from work where I haven't used my music app on my phone all day. So I open my phone, I put my AirPods in, and I shuffle my main playlist. I go about my afternoon and I pause my music before going to bed. On Spotify, when I wake up the next day and press the button to shuffle my playlist again, it just resumes playback instead of starting fresh, which makes no sense to me at all. When I press shuffle play again, I want it to shuffle my playlist, not keep going from where I left off. It's not going to play the songs that I already listened to the day before when it does this. If I wanted to resume playback, I would have resumed it from the now playing screen, not by shuffling my playlist. If I do the exact same thing on Shuffle Music, it shuffles the playlist again. In fact, I can keep pressing shuffle play every single time and it shuffles it every single time, which is how it should work. And I think that rant there just kind of sums up my experiences with Spotify already. We're nowhere near the end of this video, but almost all of my negative experiences are just little things that kind of stack on top of each other to make an experience that is just so much worse than Apple Music. These things on their own are not a big deal, but together they just... Maybe I'm just picky, but hopefully you'll at least kind of understand my point of view about why I genuinely despise Spotify by the end of this video. But as much as I don't like the app, there is at least one thing that Spotify absolutely dominates the industry in, and it's platform compatibility and integration. Now, obviously there's a bit more than one, and those strong points are the reason that I'm torn between these two apps. If there's an app that integrates with a music streaming platform, there is an almost guaranteed chance that it will work with Spotify, and there's a pretty good chance that it only works with Spotify. I'm only saying there's an almost guaranteed chance is because I've only seen one music app that integrates with Apple Music and not Spotify, and it's the DJ app on Meta Quest. Outside of that, it was nice to have a streaming app that just worked on everything. Every platform I used has an app for Spotify, even my Linux desktop setups on my Steam Deck and my workstation here at the time. But even ignoring the platform apps, considering, on Apple Music there's the web app and third-party clients, and it's not usually a huge issue, basically everything that integrates with a music platform gets Spotify support first, and probably only gets Spotify. My link in bio app of choice, for example, Bento, has dedicated widgets for Spotify profiles and playlists. Meanwhile, Apple Music links just get a generic link widget. Discord has built-in rich presence and group listening for Spotify. Arc Browser has the built-in mini player. The Meta Ray-Ban glasses got Spotify support before any other platform. You get the idea. Hell, even Stats FM was called Spotter Stats before they went and added Apple Music support after the rebrand. But one thing to note about having an app for absolutely everything is that some of those apps are just going to be terrible. Let's look at desktop, for example, because while Spotify does have a nicer looking desktop app than Apple Music, because come on Apple, we need a redesign. Why is it so bad on Mac? Why is it still iTunes? Anyway, it is a web wrapper, it's written in Electron, whereas Apple creates native apps for every single platform, even Windows and Android. And I don't even want to get started on how bad the TV Spotify app is. Like seriously, you can't view lyrics on Spotify TV. It's bad enough that they're still lagging behind for karaoke lyrics on mobile, which has apparently been rolling out since 2022, and also Apple Music has word-by-word and instrumental support for karaoke, and you can't even view the lyrics that they have on the biggest screen in your house. But I will get more into the UI and UX of Spotify later. And on the note of the Meta Ray-Bans having integration, it just does not work how it's supposed to. Maybe this is the glasses, but what Spotify Tap is supposed to do is start a new AI DJ session. What it actually does is just resume your last session, just like what I described earlier. Apple Music, on the other hand, works as expected, starting a new session each time using my personalized radio station. So even when they are first, they still manage to win the race to the bottom. But back to something Spotify does well again, and it's a big one, their algorithms and discovery features. This is the other big thing that drew me towards Spotify. When I did use Spotify, it was how I discovered some of my favorite artists. If I'm remembering correctly, it was a Spotify discovery feature that led me to essentially discover the entire genre of hyperpop outside of like 100 gecs, which is now easily one of my favorite genres of all time. Eric DOA has been topping my top artist list on Stats FM for a pretty long time. Spotify's music suggestion features are absolutely top of the line, and I cannot understate how much I wish Apple would catch up here. I get that Apple is the privacy company in the world of big tech, and while I appreciate that I can tell Apple, yes, just spy on my listening history, I don't care, they do leave some things to be desired. Although I will say that Apple's algorithms are much better than what they used to be. In late 2023, we finally got that feature where you can get suggested songs for a specific playlist, and it does tend to work pretty well in most cases. Apple's radio stations have been absolutely nailing my music taste recently, and areas where Spotify used to dominate, like those algorithmic playlists, are slowly getting better on Apple Music. Apple's new music mix is scarily close to Spotify's Discover Weekly in terms of quality and matching what I listen to, while showing me new artists that I haven't listened to before. And while yes, Apple will almost never add the absolute top tier Spotify mixes of Creamy Mix, Clancore Mix, or Riz Mix, what is here is pretty good. One thing I did take notice of with my time on Spotify is how quickly the algorithm adjusts. Within 2 days of standard listening, I had essentially completely wiped my sister's listening activity out of my homepage, with none of her suggested mixes showing up and the DJ only occasionally trying to throw in a Sabrina Carpenter song. Although I do also listen to Sabrina Carpenter, so I'm not complaining too much. And getting to the main draw that brought me to try Spotify, and it's something that I can't see Apple replicating in the near future unless they probably bring on an entirely new team for the platform, and it's the fact that Spotify is just more fun. It is the platform for social interactions, gimmicky but cool features, playlists made by anyone for anything, statistics, Wrapped, all of that and more. And you just know that Spotify's eventually going to drop some random gimmick that you're going to find at least a little bit fun at some absolutely random point in the year instead of waiting for September like Apple would. You can listen to music on any of the big platforms, they all have that nailed down. but none of them have the fun factor that Spotify has. Part of all this is just that Spotify has basically everyone. In Q4 of 2021, when I could find decently accurate numbers for both platforms, Apple Music had a pretty great 78 million subscribers, which sounds amazing until you see that Spotify had 406 million monthly active users, with 180 million of them paying for Spotify Premium, making the community aspect so much stronger. And slight side note, it kind of perplexes me how in the US, iMessage became the messaging app because it just came with the iPhone, and yet somehow everyone flocks to Spotify for music. That's weird. The user base adds to the strength of these gimmicky features because you're gonna see a good chunk of your social circle posting to their Instagram story about how, I don't know, their AI Spotify rap DJ was playing songs from the Hasman Hotel soundtrack, or whatever other feature Spotify decided to throw in that day instead of lossless. I think the worst part is that even if you have a bunch of friends on Apple Music, somehow, it still feels lonely. When you open Spotify on desktop, for example, there's a full section on the side of your screen that's dedicated to whatever your friends are listening to. Or I could open Discord up and start a listening session with another Spotify friend in a single click. I could search for a playlist for just about any situation and find one made by another user on Spotify. Meanwhile, Apple Music's community playlists are, I'm going to be honest, terrible. Like sure, Apple Music Indie's professionally curated playlist of songs for when you're catching feelings is great, but it's almost certainly not beating some playlist by Claudia on Spotify that I'd be willing to bet my life savings on being made in the midst of that exact feeling. Apple Music has a tunnel vision-like focus on your music, which is really nice to see in the world of apps designed for engagement, but it really misses out on some of those social and fun aspects. And like I mentioned earlier, having immediate access to statistics, there we go, is a nice touch. It's nice to get an accurate idea of listener numbers without external sources. As it turns out, I'm part of 0.1% of Sydney's population that listens to Eric DOA. And now that I've written it down to include in this script, the Sydney listener statistic has disappeared. Thanks Spotify, love your work. Outside of all the community parts, Spotify also has all of the mixes I mentioned earlier, for example, that are hilarious to see, and also have genuinely well curated tracks. There's the AI DJ X, there's cover art creator, there's the playing Snake with your album artworks in your playlists, and even more. Granted, a lot of this is just Spotify figuring out how to keep you in a music streaming app for as long as humanly possible, but it adds up to create an experience that no other music app has come even close to achieving. And for the last kind of overall category of my experience with Spotify, let's talk about user interface and experience, or UI and UX. At the absolute core of both apps, the UX is the same. Pick a song, start streaming it, add them to playlists, etc. But the way Spotify achieves this is in an interesting, sometimes excellent, and sometimes absolutely mind-bogglingly terrible way. And I want to talk about every little nitpick that I have with the way Spotify does things. First, let's start with the now playing screen. Personally, I'm a big fan of having my music app open on my phone on a MagSafe stand or something. So when the now playing screen looks bad, it's a huge turn-off for me. And luckily, Spotify mostly has theirs under control. The one thing I used to really hate about Spotify's Now Playing UI was the canvas feature. Now don't get me wrong, I love animated album art. I am absolutely in love with Apple Music's newer Now Playing screen for those songs that have animated artwork. But that is very rarely what Canvas is used for. But after using it for a bit, I started to really love it, and Spotify changing the interface to keep the actual album art on screen at the same time made me really come around to it, although I still seriously prefer Apple's UI. And just overall, in my opinion, the UI and UX on Apple Music is so much cleaner compared to Spotify. It still annoys me how you can scroll in the Now Playing screen on Spotify. The TV app looks absolutely horrendous like I mentioned earlier. Spotify will just do stuff like removing the heart button, which always added to liked songs, for a more general add to library button. Spotify quite literally only has Apple Music Beat on macOS because somehow Apple still hasn't rewritten Apple Music after years of it basically being a reskinned iTunes. And if you're an Apple Music user, by the way, and you hate how it works on desktop, take a look at Cider for Apple Music, you won't regret it. And that's not even considering all of the OS integration that Apple can somewhat unfairly put into their operating system. There's the favorite button right on the lock screen. There's the thing where if you put AirPods in, it just shows up with a list of your playlists right there without opening the app. It is really nice. Oh, Fortnite has entered sleep mode. Nice. There is also still somehow a massive 3 to 4 second delay when using Spotify with AirPlay, making it a nightmare to read lyrics and play music through a HomePod, for example, or when I need to quickly pause my music or adjust volumes and it takes a few seconds to actually register. I thought I'd be smart and get around this by using my Apple Music, which is paired to my HomePod as its main speaker, to play my music, and then control it with Spotify Connect. But that still somehow has a delay. It's its own speaker. Why is there a delay? Even when other apps that have non-native media players like YouTube have no delay at all. Spotify, what are you doing?
I want to give an award for good efficiency. It's kind of similar to the back.
But look, maybe you don't even care about AirPlay as a Spotify user, and I wouldn't blame you, considering that Spotify Connect is so damn nice. It still shocks me that Apple Music, the app from the ecosystem company, doesn't let you control the music playing on your phone from your iPad. The only way you can control music from a device that isn't playing it is if you're playing it to an AirPlay device, where you can then set your device to control it. Meanwhile, I could use the Spotify app on my iPhone to control the music playing on my Steam Deck running the Linux client and then move it over to my Apple TV. Everything just works, and Apple not having anything like it is a serious misstep. And now I get to rant, because there are some really specific things that just genuinely pissed me off when I was using Spotify for the week. First up, local files. Now, on the surface, Spotify's implementation seems great, especially considering that you can just drop MP3 files into the iPhone Files app to get them straight into Spotify, which you cannot do on Apple Music. You need a computer to import MP3s or FLACs into Apple Music. Yeah, cool, awesome, and then it just falls apart. When you put a song into local files on Spotify, it stays local, and I guess that's kind of what the name implies, but it really stays local. There's no syncing between devices. There's no Spotify cloud storage for music. Absolutely nothing. Let's take a look at another scenario here. Let's say I want to listen to an unreleased Eric DOA song, Oh You Don't Say, in my playlist on a couple of devices, maybe my Steam Deck, my iPhone, and my Apple TV. With Spotify, I would need to manually transfer the song file over to each individual device to anything I plan to listen to the song with.
I would also need to go in and turn on local files as it's not enabled by default, and depending on your device, you may also need to manually set the directory.
Which means I also can't listen to it at all on my TV because there's no user accessible file system and no way to sync the song over Wi-Fi into Spotify. And if I happen to lose that MP3 file, let's say I reset my Steam Deck and I lose my phone, it's just gone. I have no way of recovering it outside of just finding it again. Now that might make sense to you until you look at how it works on Apple Music and you realize, damn, Spotify could do so much better. So let's take a look at the same situation on Apple Music. Now sure, you do need a computer to sync non-streaming music here. But all I need to do is just drag my song into the window. Once I've imported it, it syncs straight to Apple's cloud without using up my iCloud storage and becomes available on every single device I'm logged in on. I can stream it or download it. It works on my TV, in the web player with the third-party app on my Steam Deck, Cider. It works on my phone, iPad, HomePod, everything. Apple's implementation isn't perfect. It doesn't support lossless audio, and it matches it to its own version if the song is available on streaming. But it is damn better than Spotify.
Do want to make a couple quick notes about Apple Cloud Sync. It can take a little bit for the songs to actually start syncing over, particularly if you're doing a full album, it can take a while, especially compared to Spotify where it's available instantly, but once it's done, it's available on everything, so I'd say that's an overall win. Apple Music does also have much better tools for changing the metadata, album art, artist, etc. So if you've got like a SoundCloud download with weird metadata, you can easily fix it in Apple Music compared to Spotify, which has no tools at all.
Plus, if I need that file again after losing the original, I can just re-download it straight from Apple Music as a DRM-free file. The service closest to Apple Music in this regard is YouTube Music, but that doesn't let you download the original file again for whatever reason. And even when you finally get your local files into Spotify properly, it's a complete gamble whether it picks up the album art and actually makes it look nice. All of the local songs I have in my Apple Music library picked up the embedded image perfectly, but the ones I imported into Spotify either didn't show them at all or only showed on specific devices. Across 3 Eric Dewey songs, the songs Boys Don't Cry and had album art on my Mac, and Oh You Don't Say did not. Meanwhile, with the exact same files on my phone, only Oh You Don't Say had album art and the other 2 didn't. Because yeah, sure, do whatever you want, Spotify. For the final nail in my week on Spotify journey coffin, Spotify Wrapped. Now obviously, I wasn't expecting to get my own, considering I'd started listening after the data cutoff. But The Wrapped in general signaled in a concerning direction for Spotify's intentions as a company, and particularly in AI. And I'm not talking about how people were going, they use AI for this Wrapped, as if the other ones were written by hand for all 500 million users, but I'm talking about the lack of actually good editorials like in previous years, all to be replaced by the Notebook LM AI Wrapped podcast, and that's about it. Wrapped was on par with Apple Music Replay this year, and Apple Music's doesn't even change year over year. I'm not saying Replay is good, but Wrapped wasn't much better. The hype behind Wrapped was part of my initial motivation, and how terrible this year was just killed it for me. And with that, I wrap up my experience with Spotify. There's a few other little things, like how I seriously hate even having the option to scroll through an album like it's a TikTok feed, and how you can't set your liked songs to public, but I digress. Spotify isn't terrible, but it's very clear that the only reason they are the top streaming service is because they were first, and because everyone else is already there. As you probably guess, I am back on Apple Music now, although I'll definitely be revisiting it at some point because something just keeps drawing me back to it. You can go follow me on Apple Music if you use it, and you can also follow me on Instagram, Blue Sky, and everything else with the links on screen and in the description below.
Also, we have a Discord. Go join it. probablyhades.co/Discord. Go join.
If you want more Hades, you can click over here to check out my review of the DJI Neo drone, or you can click over here to check out whatever YouTube thinks you'll like. Thanks for watching. Hope you guys had a great holiday season. Remember to subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you guys in 2025.